We appealed to the courts to overturn this decision.
Así que se apeló a la Corte para que cambiara esta decisión.
But in 2024, the court upheld this decision.
Pero el año 2024, ahora la Corte recibió esta apelación también.
And so we appealed to a higher court in Norway.
Así que tuvimos que ir a la Corte, una Corte más alta ahí en Noruega.
In February of 2025,
En febrero del 2025,
our case was heard for 2 weeks by the Court of Appeal.
nuestro caso fue atendido durante unas 2 semanas por la Corte de Apelación.
A great victory for Jehovah's people.
¡Qué tremenda victoria para el pueblo de Jehová!
The battle is not over yet.
Pero esta batalla todavía no termina.
The government appealed to the Supreme Court of Norway,
Ahora el gobierno apeló a la Corte Suprema de Noruega.
and the hearing was held just a couple of weeks ago.
Y la audiencia fue solo hace un par de semanas atrás.
We are all now waiting for the decision of the Supreme Court.
Así que ahora estamos a la espera de la decisión de la
On February 28, 2026, in Santiago, Chile, Mark Sanderson stood before thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses and performed something that looked, on the surface, like a victory speech. He is one of the 8 men who form the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the supreme council of a global religious movement with over 8 million active members. When these men speak, those 8 million people do not evaluate what they hear. They receive it. Because inside this world, the words of the governing body carry the weight of divine instruction. Questioning them is not encouraged. It is dangerous. So when Sanderson took that stage in Chile and declared the organization completely victorious, the thousands in that room responded exactly the way they were conditioned to respond, with relief, with gratitude, with the reassurance that God is in control and His people are protected. But let's look at what was actually happening in that room. Sanderson was not reporting a spiritual victory. He was reporting a legal one. The battles he described, the ones in Belgium and Norway, are not battles over theology. They are not debates about scripture or doctrine. They are civil court cases. Cases brought by secular governments against the Jehovah's Witnesses organization for specific, documented practices that those governments determine to be violations of human rights. The organization is not in European courts because the world hates the truth. It is in European courts because it has policies that break up families, that force parents to cut off contact with their own children, and that punish people for exercising the basic human right to change their religion. And those courts, the ones Sanderson is celebrating wins in, the ones he is asking members to pray about, are funded by taxes, run by human beings, governed by secular law. They are, by the Jehovah's Witnesses' own theological framework, part of the system of Satan, which raises a question that the 8 million people in those kingdom halls are not supposed to ask. If God's organization does not belong to this world, why is it fighting this hard to be recognized and funded by it? The answer is simple, even if the organization will never say it plainly. There is money at stake. In Norway alone, state subsidies for religious organizations run into the millions. Losing legal recognition does not just affect reputation, it affects the budget. And an organization that spent decades building assembly halls, printing facilities, branch offices, and global infrastructure needs that budget. This is what Sanderson was really celebrating in Chile, not a theological vindication, a financial and legal reprieve, and the members sitting in those seats were told it was God working on their behalf. That framing is not accidental. It is the foundation of everything else he said that day. The tactic of dehumanizing ex-members. At some point during his Chile address, Sanderson shifted his tone. He stopped talking about court victories and started talking about the people he considers responsible for the organization's legal problems in the first place, former members. He called their accusations horrible. He used the word pillos, swindlers, fraudsters, con artists. He painted a picture of a coordinated campaign of lies driven by bitterness, mental instability, and spiritual failure. This is not a new tactic. The Jehovah's Witnesses have been dismissing critics this way for decades. But it is worth stopping to understand exactly what this tactic accomplishes, because it accomplishes something very specific and very deliberate. When a government in Norway or Belgium investigates the Jehovah's Witnesses for human rights violations, that investigation does not begin with gossip. It begins with testimony. Former members sit in front of investigators, lawyers, and judges and describe, in detail, what happened to them inside this organization. They describe being told at 17 or 18 years old that if they left, their parents would never speak to them again. They describe elders conducting closed-door judicial hearings that determined their social fate without any external oversight. They describe teenagers being disfellowshipped and losing every relationship they had ever known overnight. Those testimonies are now part of court records. They are not rumors. They are not the venting of bitter apostates. They are documented evidence in active legal proceedings before some of the most respected judicial institutions in Europe. When Sanderson stands in front of thousands of members and calls these people pillos, he is not just attacking individuals. He is doing something much more strategic. He is preemptively discrediting the source of the information his members are most likely to encounter if they ever open a browser and start searching. Because that is the real threat, not the courts. The courts are made up of lawyers and judges who the average Jehovah's Witness will never personally engage with. The real threat is a member sitting at home, curiosity beginning to stir, typing a name into a search bar and finding a YouTube channel, a Reddit thread, or a legal document that describes the inside of this organization in terms they recognize. If Sanderson can make that person think, oh, that's just an apostate, a pillow, a liar, before they ever click the link, then he has done his job, not for God, for institutional self-preservation. The tragedy is that the people most harmed by this tactic are the ones still inside, because the documents are public, the court records are real, and anyone willing to read them will find that the horrible accusations Sanderson dismissed in Chile match, in remarkable detail, the findings of independent governments, human rights organizations, and judicial bodies across multiple countries. That is not coincidence, that is pattern. And labeling it apostasy does not make it go away. Norway and the truth they are hiding. Let's talk about the Norway case specifically, because Sanderson addressed it directly in Chile, and the way he described it to his audience is a textbook example of a lie told through selective omission. His version of events is straightforward. The Norwegian government removed the organization's registration and cut off its state funding because the Jehovah's Witnesses practice church discipline. They remove people who sin. Governments that don't like that, he implied, are simply intolerant of genuine religious practice. That framing is designed to sound reasonable. Every religion disciplines its members in some way. The idea that a government would penalize a church simply for enforcing its own moral standards sounds, to someone inside this world, like religious persecution. But that is not what happened in Norway. And the gap between Sanderson's version and the actual documented reason for the Norwegian government's decision is wide enough to walk a courtroom through. The Norwegian authorities did not object to the Jehovah's Witnesses practicing church discipline. They objected to a specific application of that discipline, one that directly affects minors. Here is the reality the organization does not want its members to understand. The Jehovah's Witnesses baptize children, not infants, but children, teenagers, 12, 13, 14 years old, raised entirely inside this religious environment, making a commitment to an organization whose full demands they are not yet emotionally or intellectually equipped to evaluate. And once that child is baptized, they are subject to the full weight of the organization's disciplinary machinery. If that baptized teenager later questions the doctrine, leaves, or is found to have violated the organization's rules, they can be disfellowshipped, publicly announced as no longer a Jehovah's Witness, and every member of the congregation, including their own parents, is expected to cut off all association with them, not because those parents are cruel, but because the organization has told them that doing otherwise puts their own standing at risk. The Norwegian government looked at that practice, specifically as it applied to minors and young adults who were baptized as children, and concluded that it violated the rights of those individuals, not the rights of the adults who chose to join as fully informed grown people. The rights of children who were born into this system and committed to it before they had the capacity to meaningfully consent. That is what the case is about. Not sinners being disciplined, children being trapped. And the Supreme Court of Norway is expected to issue its final ruling on this in 2026. Sanderson knows that if that ruling goes against the organization, it will not stay in Norway. Belgium is watching. Other European governments with strong human rights frameworks are watching. And a precedent that says the systematic shunning of minors violates individual rights is a precedent that threatens the core mechanism through which this organization maintains control over its membership globally. This is why he asked the people in that room to pray 3 times harder, not because God needs the encouragement, because the organization's legal team is genuinely uncertain about the outcome, and the governing body is quietly preparing its members for the possibility that the news from Oslo might not be good. The well-dressed argument and the lawyer who never converted. Now we need to talk about the moment in Sanderson's Chile speech that, more than anything else he said, reveals the intellectual depth of the arguments the organization is relying on in these European courts. Sanderson recounted, with evident pride, an observation made by the Jehovah's Witnesses' own attorney in Belgium. This lawyer, who has worked with the organization for years, reportedly told the court that the Jehovah's Witnesses are wonderful people, that they are well-dressed, that they have beautiful families. Sanderson presented this as a meaningful legal point, as evidence that the organization's practices are not harmful. Let's sit with that for a moment. The argument, as presented to a Belgian court, is essentially this: these people look nice, therefore their policies do not violate human rights. No one who has spent 5 minutes thinking seriously about institutional abuse would accept that logic. The appearance of members tells you nothing about whether the policies they live under are coercive. Families destroyed by shunning do not look destroyed from the outside until the moment the shunning happens. A teenager who has never been allowed to research anything outside the organization's approved materials looks fine in a suit at a Kingdom Hall. A parent who has not spoken to their child in 3 years can still get dressed up on a Sunday morning. The clothing argument is not a legal defense. It is a distraction. And the fact that it was offered, and that Sanderson repeated it in Chile as though it were a compelling point, suggests that the actual legal arguments are not landing the way the organization would like. But there is something even more interesting buried in this story, and Sanderson apparently did not notice the irony as he told it. This lawyer has been working with the Jehovah's Witnesses for years. He knows them. He has seen them up close. He has presumably heard their arguments, read their literature, and spent significant time in their company. And he never became one of them. A man who works closely with an organization that claims to represent the one true religion on earth, who has had years of exposure to its people and its message, and who looks at all of that and decides that what he wants is a paycheck, not a baptism. The governing body is using as its key witness a man whose own life choices constitute a quiet but unmistakable vote of no confidence in the very thing he is being paid to defend. And underneath all of this, the Belgian court case, the lawyer's testimony, the well-dressed argument, lies the deeper double standard that defines how the governing body processes legal outcomes. When they win a case in court, as they claim to have done recently in Belgium, the victory is immediately attributed to Jehovah. God moved. God protected his people. The secular system, the courts of Satan's world, delivered a judgment that proves divine backing. But when they lose, when Norway strips their registration, when a government says their practices violate human rights, when a court sides with the former members Sanderson calls pilos, that outcome is persecution, satanic opposition, proof that the world hates the truth. Heads I win, tails it's Satan. This is not theology. It is a closed epistemic system designed to make it impossible for any external outcome to challenge the organization's self-image. Good news is God. Bad news is the devil. The members never have to confront the possibility that the courts might simply be right. While Sanderson was delivering this speech in Chile, celebrating victories, attacking ex-members, and asking for triple prayers, he also announced something that deserves to be the final image of this video. El Trebol, a Jehovah's Witnesses assembly hall in Chile, built to hold 10,000 people, decades of regional gatherings, thousands of seats filled, year after year, with members who believed they were part of a growing, unstoppable global movement, being demolished. In its place, the organization will build a new hall for 3,000 people, 70% smaller. And this is happening right now, while the courts close in. While former members build audiences online that rival the governing body's own broadcasts, while experienced elders step back from positions they no longer have the energy or the conviction to hold. And the organization's solution is to lower the minimum age for those positions to 21. What Sanderson was really doing in Chile was not celebrating a victory, he was managing a retreat. He was inoculating 8 million people against the news that is coming, telling them in advance how to feel about outcomes he cannot control, from courts he cannot predict, in countries where the organization's practices are now a matter of public legal record. He asked them to pray 3 times harder. Here is the question worth leaving you with. The Jehovah's Witnesses teach that their disfellowshipping policy comes directly from God. It is not a human rule. It is not a practical guideline. It is divine instruction, unchanged and unchangeable. If the Supreme Court of Norway rules that this policy violates human rights, do you believe the governing body will change it? And if they do change it, what does that tell you about every other policy they have told you came from the same source? Leave your answer in the comments, because the 2026 ruling from Norway is not just a legal event. For anyone paying attention, it might be something much more significant than that.